Hi guys. So the other day I was looking through all of my racks that I had made over time, and I discovered a interesting method of making a really powerful, really simple rack that does a lot of stuff. So I'll just show like the basics behind how this works first. So if I grab an operator and then throw it in here like that, this is just a normal sine wave. If I duplicate it and then phase cancel it, which if you don't know, phase canceling is inverting the wave. So I'll show that by flattening these tracks here. And as you can see, these tracks have a sine wave that is opposite on each one. And now this means that it's going to add up to 0 if I play them together. And I'll also show this by recording it here like this. So as you can hear and see, there's nothing. And that's because these are perfectly canceling each other out. And now that's useful for quite a few things. So if I grab an operator again, I guess, and then distort it with a clipper here, throw this note in again, and now I distort it. Now I can take the opposite of this distortion, or only the parts that are getting clipped, by running it in parallel with a phase inverted utility. And now this is more obvious if I use it on something like a drum break. So I'll just throw in this one. So now if I do the same thing, kind of sounds like a transient shaper, right? So that's pretty cool. Then the other thing you can do with this is you can take a EQ and then it'll be silent by default. And then if you carve out a part, it only plays the part you're carving out. So it's like turning a notch filter into a bandpass, basically. And now this is pretty useful. I'll start constructing the full setup. So we got this EQ, and then I'm going to have this chain, which is going to be a signal with an effect on it. So I'll put reverb on it, for example. Excellent. So now I'm going to use a gate device. And the thing about the Ableton gate device is you can sidechain input from something and then listen to the sidechain, which means it essentially works for audio routing. But also, for some reason, the gate is the only thing with a sidechain that like remembers where its audio is coming from when you load it in a new rack. Like it seems it saves the audio in the context of the rack. Meanwhile, normally you lose all the routing when you import a rack, which is super annoying. So love gate. We love gate. So what I'm going to do is take this reverb and grab the post effects from the reverb and turn it off in the selector here. So it'll be both things going through the EQ. Hold on, I have to run it in parallel to the dry signal. Okay, and now that we have both going through this EQ, what I'm going to do is grab utility, grab another gate, and then do a similar thing where I phase invert this and then sidechain it from the wet signal once again, and then run that in parallel and make sure it's listening. And now you hear, it sounds only like the dry signal, but when I move this EQ, it's blending in the wet signal based on where I put the EQ. And this is already super useful for a lot of stuff because it can lead to a bunch of cool like harmonic manipulation stuff where let's say I put like a shifter on this and then, let me turn up the window. I can choose which part of the signal is getting shifted up and down. But it's more powerful than this because you don't have to use an EQ here. You can use anything you want here. Remember how I used the peak eater earlier? I'll load that in again, the clipper, and then I'll do the same thing. And now just the parts of the signal that are getting clipped are being pitched up an octave, and the rest are staying the same, which sounds really weird and really cool. Now you can do that with so much more stuff than that, though. You can use a limiter if you want. I'll turn down this window here. So you hear as I fade that in, now it's basically working like a transient replacer. And you can actually do this as well with a transient shaper. I'll just use the kilohertz one. And then now it's taking just the transients from the original audio and mixing in the other audio. So already this is extremely versatile for mixing audio together and doing like weird distortion effects and all of that. But you can do even more. If I load in an EQ like this and then throw a utility on and go minus 6 dB, and if you didn't know, 6 dB means it halves the volume. And then if I duplicate this chain here and then make a dry and a wet one, and the reason why I'm doing this is so we can have effects on both sides. And then I'll have to route that in, of course. So instead of this empty chain here, I'm just going to grab the same thing that I was routing the other audio from and then route it from the wet. So I have one on dry, one on wet. Oh yeah, I have to fix this thing too, because this is now going from the dry effects when it should be going from the wet effects. And then we throw one to the left and throw one to the right like this. And now it's sounding phase canceled here. We'll just have to phase invert it again. And now it sounds normal. And now I can use this EQ to spectrally pan, basically. So I can pan a certain frequency left and right. And one thing to keep in mind with this effect is that since we're going minus 6 dB here, it's going to reach its maximum at positive 6 dB on this EQ, and then it's still going to go to like negative infinity on the other side. So you can change how much it's panned using this gain, basically. And then that changes where like the middle line of your EQ panner is going to be or whatever. You can also do this if I set one, if you didn't know on Ableton, you can right click on this and switch to mid side mode and then fade between mid and side signals. So if I do that and then one mid, one side, then you can blend between the mid and side signals. But you can do more than that. You can use some more complicated effects like soothe, for example. And now I can have like the really trippy effect of having some parts of the signal panned based on how loud they are, like this. And this kind of hurts your head a little bit, but you can get really, really weird effects like this. So let's say I want to add texture to this. I can actually do that really easily with this rack as well. If I put a clipper on here and then make sure it clips a little bit, like that's too much. There we go. Now we can see the texture a little bit here. And then if I put just any white noise on this, so I'm going to put like M noise generator on here. And now it's doing kind of a similar thing to erosion or something like the Crisp VST, where, you know, it's like distorting noise with the original signal. But I find this does it in a more precise way because it just does it on the very tips of the signal that you select, like this. So it's almost like a way to really easily do gated noise, but also like distorted noise. Here, I might as well just try another one right now. Like, what if I put a shifter on here and then frequency shift it up a little bit and let the phase canceling there take care of it? Yeah, that's weird. Maybe I'll switch this out for a wavetable so we can actually get like a Reese kind of. Another thing I'm going to try is putting this erosion in the middle here, see what happens. It has a bit of tone almost, so I have like a chord going. Try throwing a redux on here. Let's try putting a vocoder in here. Sounds like most of it's going through, but it's going through in a very interesting, more textured way than you'd expect. What if I sidechain it to the dry signal? Now I have a Reese kind of. I also want to show you another example of how you can use this to blend things in your track together. So I'll grab some like melody loops here, Shadow Capio. And let's say I want to blend these two together. I guess they're not in the same key, so I'll make sure. That harmonizes pretty well. So now if I take this and then take the same rack that we just made and throw it on, instead of the dry signal coming from the dry thing, I can just switch it to coming from anywhere, or the wet signal. So in this case, I'll switch the wet signal to coming from this new sample that we just added, and I'll switch it on this side as well. And now if I delete all the effects I have on here, throw on new EQ, you'll hear that I can blend these effects together in a really interesting way. Since an EQ has mid-side on it, you can do this processing in mid-side. So I can have the side signal come more from one and the mid signal come more from another, and change that depending on what I'm looking at in the spectrum. If you go above the halfway mark, the EQ boosts and also mixes in some of the other effect. Meanwhile, if you go below, it will essentially replace the original audio with the new audio. Now I'm just going to go through and try a couple weird effects and see what happens. So first, spectral compressor. What does it do? Let's find out. It kind of sounds like it's just fading them together, but it is based on what's being cut out here. So it's kind of like a spectral gate, but we're replacing one sound with another one. Speaking of which, let's try a spectral gate. I want to slide this until the volume is roughly compensated. There's some harsh resonances. Let me fix that. What the? Okay. This is a really almost smooth way of mixing these sounds together. And why not try mixing that with this bass up here? I'll switch that over to the Reese here and this one as well. Oh, that's cool. This could be a really unique way to do like a high pass of a bass into a chord. And try it with lower size. Now it sounds super watery. All right, so now let's say you have this rack, but you want to apply effects to each of the things after they get separated out by the EQ or whatever. Because right now what we've been doing is applying the effects before they go through, so it kind of fades between the two versions of the effects. And also both of the channels with the effects go into the processing at once. So if you have a clipper, then your wet chain and your dry chain are actually both going into the clipper, which means if you have something that affects the volume a lot on the wet chain, then it'll mess with your signal. Now, the reason why I showed this first is because it's a bit more flexible and you can do the blending between tracks with it, like I just showed. And also it leads to some cool, unpredictable effects. So I feel like it's just better in general for experimentation. But for something more precise, I have this other rack here that I'll grab right now. So it's just this rack called split differences. And the way this works is you put an effect in the bottom chain here, and then you have an unchanged channel where you just route the post effects of the effect. So this is just like exactly what this channel would sound like. I'm only splitting it here. So if I want to put effects, I can leave this nice and clean. And then I have this differences channel here, which is really simple. It's just another version of that same gate, which is taking the post effects of our channel with the effect on it. And then it's just phase inverting that against the dry chain. And then this gives you the benefit that you can hear that this is an inverted version of this EQ. So it splits those, and then no matter what effect you put here, it will be completely unchanged until you put effects on this. So I'll show some examples with that. I think it's most useful with stuff like transient shapers, for example, because with a transient shaper, if you want to apply anything like reverb or something else that affects the space of a sound, you'd probably want to do it after you do the transient shaping. Otherwise, you're kind of gating the reverb too. Here, let me switch to a sound that's easier to hear the transient shaping on. So I'll throw in a break. So now you hear, this is the inverted version of the transient shaper. This is normal transient shaper, and then it will do it with whatever effect you put in here. So now if I want to put a reverb on just the transients, I can do that. So that's also pretty useful. With this method, because you're using an effect and drawing from it both times, you can't really use it to fade between two channels like you could with the previous one, which is why I didn't show first. But this is more useful in a lot of more specific scenarios where you're not just trying to make a weird sound and are actually trying to like split two sounds in a coherent way. But yeah, this rack is just so powerful in general that I had to share it quickly. It's not a very polished tutorial. I want to do more polished, fancy tutorials about Ableton things that I've been figuring out. But for now, this is fantastic. I think this rack is, I mean, it's already been really changing my workflow and how I think about making like organic, dirty sounds that require this kind of texture and living feeling. Because you can have so much stuff be audio reactive that normally you'd have to use like envelope followers or something else like kind of annoying to set up. And you can just make really weird, unique effects and take advantage of phasing in a really cool way. And I think I've only scratched the surface of what is possible with techniques like this. Anyway, yeah, I hope you find this rack useful. I'll put the rack in the description somewhere, although it's so easy to make, you probably don't need to download it. Anyway, yeah, catch you later.